All right. There is so much I want to share that I have just figured out. I feel very excited. I'm going to try to do this simply, but basically, I've been trying to figure out how to customize the seam allowance to allow me to add in hem allowance. So to this point, I have my pieces saved, and I have them all labeled for easy reference. So I'm in the details mode right now. So at this point I've drawn everything, and then I have used this tool right here, the seam allowance tool, to select my pieces. And for posterity's sake, I guess I could just show you how to do that real quick here with a simple thing. So once you have your piece drawn, you basically just have to click. You don't have to hold the control. It just says right down here, select your main path, and make sure you're selecting it in a clockwise fashion, so the points and the lines that you're selecting have to go in a clockwise fashion. So let's do this one right here, this bottom skirt portion. So here's a point, and then you want to select any curves that you have. You need to select those. Lines you don't, but curves you do. And it's going the correct direction. You can see that little arrow there. It's going the clockwise way. So hit that, and then I wanted to end at that point. Now this one, that's going in the right direction too, so that's good. And end at this point. This one down here is going the wrong direction, but you can see down here it tells you just hit shift to reverse that direction. So hit your shift key and then click it. At this point here, and that point there. And then I'm going to hit this end point right here and then enter. So it pops up and it gives you the path of that selection. This is a very interesting thing that you don't realize what it means until you get to layout. I click this. When it happens is when you get to wanting to print out your patterns, the Valentina will figure out a way to position them on your paper to use the least amount of paper, but sometimes what it does is it flips your pattern pieces in order to get it to fit. And I prefer my pattern pieces to stay the way that they are, just for easy reference, so that I know the front and the back by orientation. So I'm going to click that. You can't do anything else at this point because you're just making this piece that you're going to see in the detail thing. So you just click OK. And then go into details. That is that piece that I just drew. It shows up exactly over where it is in the draw section, but in the details mode you can move it around like I've already done for these things. So I'm just going to go ahead and just get rid of this one. Or I'll show you really quick the options you can do. You could add on your seam allowance. Actually, the one I want to show you is this basic one. You've got it clicked here. You can go over here and you can, how do I name it? Options, allowance, labels. There it is. That's where you can enter in, back, side, skirt, too, and click that. And then it shows up over there. So that's very helpful, so you just don't have a bunch of things that just say detail. Alright, so the main thing I want to show you is how to add on the seam allowances correctly. Now there was some thing in the forums about doing I'm going to go back into draw, doing a special seam allowance thing where I took these dots that were points that were the width of the seam allowance I wanted, and I flipped them here, and I used this tool, this piece tool, to go to this path, and I did custom seam allowance. I was trying to do all this, and it wasn't working for me. What I ended up with, if I go to details, is this piece right here. So you can see under my seam allowance here, I tried to use that path with a start point and end point and as a custom seam allowance, but it cut off the edges of there, and I didn't know what was going on. There is a much simpler way to do this, and you can see I've successfully done it on this piece right here. So what was the first thing that got me figuring it out was someone explaining in the ebook about how to get rid of seam allowance on edges that you are going to be on a fold. And so what I have back here is I have a pleat on this back skirt part where where the ebook showed you how to get rid of seam allowance, and it was basically, and that's what opened up the doors to me to figuring out how to do the hem allowance. So you go to options and you go to your seam allowance here, and basically you pick the points that are throughout your piece, and before it you can select what you want the seam allowance to be before it and what you want it to be after it. And so the default here, I'm just going to redo, oh, I guess I could have gone back here. So, and then I'm going to go back to 62, default that, and then go to, so I'm just basically restoring what it normally was beforehand. Okay, default that. So this was the default that it just put when I went here to my options and went to seam allowance. I clicked selected seam allowance, and I wrote in what the seam allowance I wanted to be. What I didn't realize what was going on in this section right here. This is where you can change the amount of seam allowance that is before and after specific points in your pattern piece. So to make this line here before A61 and after A62, to have nothing there, you take this and you hit 0 before, and then you go to the other piece that's going to be the point that's going to be right before you want it to hit 0, and then you go after and hit 0 that way. And so that takes it off. Well, then what you can also do with this function is to change the seam allowance along the edge between these points down here. There might be a quicker way to do this, I don't know, but at least this works well enough. So I'm going to do it on this piece because there's only going to be 2 points. But notice there was something else that I learned reading the ebook. I didn't know what this was for, this insert node tool. I didn't understand that. What it is if you miss a point when you're selecting your points in clockwise and your curves to create your pattern piece, you can go and refine that point and put it in. So let's do that for this pattern piece right here so I can show you how to add the hem to it, because it's a pretty simple piece to add to. So I got to go back to draw, and then, oh, which piece is it? I need that point right there. Okay, so I'll go back to draw. So the point I'm missing here is this A6. So I'm going to click this button here, Insert Node Tool, click that point, and then it asks me what piece I want to put it to. And so that was the backside skirt. Click OK. And then I go back into my details mode. It's not there. What happens is you right click here, get your options up. There it is. There's that piece, that point that you didn't include. the node you didn't include. And it's X'd out right now because you need to put it into the correct location in the correct order for it to work right. So it needs to go after this. Where does it go? Does it go here? Yeah, it goes right here before 43 and after that. It's still crossed out, but you right click. It's excluded right now, but you click that way and then it's included, and then hopefully this works. There it is. Okay, so there's the point. It showed up. So to add on a hem to this bottom edge, I'm going to go back into my options, go to seam allowance, and then I'm going to find those 2 points. Node A50 is this corner point right here. Before that can be the current, but after that you can type in what you want your seam allowance to be if it's always the same, but I always want to change my mind. So what I decided to do was to include it into my measurements about what I wanted that seam allowance to be. I mean that hem allowance for it. So in case I wanted to change it, I could just go in, change the measurement, and then update everything. So here's my hem tunic allowance, which is 2.5 inches, which I have converted to centimeters. And click OK. So then I also have to take this other point that's on the other side of where I want my hem, which is this A6. Before it, I want it to be that same hem allowance. Okay, and after the normal. And you click OK. And there you have it. That is how you add on a hem. It is amazingly simple and very adaptable to a lot of different issues. So I'm going to have to do a lot to add in my hem to all those different points down there. But that's how you get no seam allowance on a side of a fold. And then I had this weird little issue going on here. I can't quite figure out. I think it's got to do something with this curve. But I was able to fix this, and I left it be so I can show you that real quick. Go right click options, go to seam allowance. This is point 42, the node 42. So I think it was, I just changed this to be first edge symmetry to, this is the angle of the seam allowances. So before it was all by length, so it was just the length on everything, but you can change what you want those seam allowances to be. So to get rid of that clunky corner caused by some probably miscalculation or curve issue, I just hit first edge symmetry, clicked OK, and then got rid of that. Real quick, to add on labels, I got all this information, I was adding it, I didn't know how to get the actual label on. You go to this label, click the detail, visible, click OK, and then it shows up there. So that's how that finally does. And another quick thing, these internal lines, I didn't know how to do those before either. I've already added one in. That is something that, what I was trying to do here with that current that custom seam allowance, I don't know what that's for seam allowance, but it does work very well. That's how you do the internal lines here. So I'm going to do real quick, I'm going to do this other line that shows the fold of the pleat I need here. So get this tool again, what's it called? Piece path tool. I'm going to click these two lines here. Again, if I was going to do some curves and I needed to reverse the direction, I could hit shift. You just have to click the lines, hit enter when you're done. This is a pleat for me. It's an internal path, and then you have to pick what piece you want it on. This is the, oh no, on the back side, back skirt. Click OK. And then you go back into your details, and then it just shows up automatically. So learned a lot just in the last 5 minutes, and hopefully this was very helpful for you. All right.